There you go. We all ready to go.
I'm gonna go on mute. We got Snellville, Georgia in the building, Cincinnati on the battlefront as always. Family, I'm giving it to Kyle. Kyle, you are now free to take it away. Family, share this video. Get this video out there. Share this video in those Shabbat posts. Let's get them riled up a little bit here, because we know, and I know, y'all finna learn something today. So without further ado, Kyle, the floor is yours.
Ashayo, and peace to all my African Americans in the chat right now. Peace to all my African brothers and sisters. I want to start off with a positive affirmation that I am amazing. Even if all the massive fossil and DNA evidence of human evolution were completely left out, archaeological evidence shows that the Stone Age human cultures go back.
Mac got killed, right? Mac was killed, right? We all ready to go. I'm gonna go on mute. We got Snellville, Georgia in the building, Cincinnati on the battlefront as always. Family, I'm giving it to Kyle. Kyle, you are now free to take it away. Family, share this video. Get this video out there. Share this video in those Shabbat posts. Let's get them riled up a little bit here, because we know, and I know, y'all finna learn something today. So without further ado, Kyle, the floor is yours.
I say yo, and peace to all my African Americans in the chat right now. Peace to all my African brothers and sisters. I want to start off with a positive affirmation that I am amazing. I am beautiful. I am everything that the God that I believe in created me to be and more. I am that one. I am Kyle. You know what I'm saying? So like that's my positive affirmation I wake up every day with, and y'all should have something that y'all wake up to as well. And I want to thank y'all for joining in for this presentation. The presentation that we have today, it kind of can get intricate, so bear with me here. The title of my presentation is "Are the Descendants of West Africa the Jews Referenced in the Bible?" by Kyle Ajaka. This is something I did a few years ago in 2019, so bear with me. If y'all have any questions, please reserve them for after the presentation. If you could allow the chat to ask questions. If you do have a question in the chat, let me rephrase that. Put the word question in front of your question after the video, and I'll try to answer your question. That's if you do not want to come onto the stage and ask me a question directly. But let's get to it, man. Let's go. So the first thing that we got to understand is when we have Hebrew Israelites is how do we determine the biblical timeline of when these Hebrew Israelites existed, right? Because that's the main thing, right? If something existed, this is a scientific argument, right? In science, people and things they exist in a location and at a time, right? So the first thing that we have to do is understand the time, because we have been given a central location, but now let's understand the timeline of said existence, right? So how do we determine the biblical timeline? The timeline of the Tanakh can be estimated using the ages given in Genesis and Jubilees, starting with the creation of Adam and adding the information when his son was born, the age of his son, etc. This gives a timeline for Adam's creation and the death of Jacob. To the death of Jacob, which was 22,055 years later. So we understand the full timeline from Adam to Jacob's lineage. Jacob is a forefather of the tribes of Israel. These timelines are used by biblical scholars to estimate the age of the earth by counting back to the number of years associated with the biblical patriarchs and adding these numbers together. The next page, I will show you what I mean, right? So in order to reverse engineer the time of the earth, and most people that believe in the biblical narrative believe the earth is a certain age, what we have to do is reverse engineer. What we do is we use Abraham's age. Abraham was on 100 before he had his first child. Then we have when he had his first child with Terah and Sahor, and we go back and forth to Shem, Noah, and we reverse engineer the scenario, right? So how do we arrive at the date of 4,400 BC for the creation of the world? Genealogists in Genesis 5 and 7 allowed a pattern, and father lived years, and begot son, allowing these years to show that Abraham was born about 2,000 years after God created Adam. We align Abraham's life with the calendar based on archaeological evidence. So what we've done is we've assimilated the birth of Adam, and we come forward 2,000 years. This is the birth here. So what we're doing is we're using that to approximate the time period of which these individuals existed. Now, what we have been presented with is problems. What we presented with, right? Even if all the massive fossil and DNA evidence of human evolution were completely left out, archaeological evidence shows that the Stone Age human cultures go back much further than 50,000 years BC. And the people were around long before the Stone Age. By 8,000 BC in Palestine, agriculture, animal domestication, and permanent home sites has already been developed. And this is before the Bible has even been created, or even before the creations of Adam. So we know for a fact that we have cultures, we have cities, we have the formation of towns and locations, and we have different ages that are occurring prior to the biblical narrative. So this is where we see a problem occurring based on the biblical narrative, because the reason why I showed that first screen is because the biblical narrative only goes back to a certain time period. And we went to that time period and shows that we have a pre-existing culture and a pre-existing society that predates that. What we have next is the African evolutionary history inferred from the whole genome sequencing data of 44 indigenous African populations, right? What this is a case study, right? This is a case study of the outer Africa theory, right? And I know y'all gonna trip on the word theory. We can deal with that when we had a question and answer period, but this just a little bit of information about the genetic structure analyzes and indicate that strong African genetics ancestry is largely partitioned by geography and language. We observe mixed ancestry, and many individuals consist in both short and long range migrations that follow the admixture. Phylogenetic analysis indicates that the sand genetic lineages is basal to most modern human lineages. The Sand and Niger-Congo, Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan lineage were substantially diverged about 160,000 years ago. Now, that number stands out to me because that number kind of kills the entire biblical narrative about the world being 6,000 years ago if we do the reverse engineering of the lineage and the birth of Adam. So, and matter of fact, for this presentation, we can give Adam 1,000-year wiggle room, and we're still going to come up 100,000 years short of this particular understanding. Now, in contrast, the sand and the Central African rainforest hunter-gatherer populations, the Hadza hunter-gatherer and the Sandwich hunter-gatherer lineages would diverge in 120 to 100,000 years ago. In the Niger-Congo area, the Nilo-Saharan and the Afro-Asiatic languages diverged more recently by 54 to 16,000 years ago. Eastern and Western Congo languages diverged by the 50 and the 31,000 years ago, and the Western KRHG languages diverged by 18 to 12,000 years ago. The San and the HG populations maintain the positive selection of genes involved in muscle development, bone synthesis, reproduction, immune function, energy, metabolism, and cell signaling, which may contribute to the local adaptation of African populations. So what we have here is, this is one of the genetic studies that I pulled up for this report, and it's sourced, and you have the people who was involved in the report that's listed above that indicate that this was something that they found from their research, that we know these dates. The dates, they're not specifically to the day or to the year, but that's not how science works. So you're going to get an estimate. You're going to get a rough estimate of the time period, worst case to best case scenario, meaning this is the furthest back that we see it happening, and this is the soonest that we see it happening. And none of these things are happening within the time period of the biblical narrative. Next thing we'll do, we'll go into the path of human migration. This is actually a video. I do not want to show that on Chris's channel because I don't want to get him struck, but it's a video that you can see on PBS. The full video itself is about 15 minutes long. It shows the out of Africa theory down to the detail. This is for a presentation that I was going to do on my own channel. My channel is not monetized. I have no attempts to be monetized, so I shared it there. But this is a pretty much an overview of the outer Africa theory, right?
You can show it, yeah. You can show it. It's
okay.
No, yeah, as long as you know it's fair use, yeah.
Okay, okay.
It's educational, yeah.
Yes. Hold on. Let me Let me see how I show this shit right quick. Oh man, I don't know. For some reason, it's not showing. I'm gonna skip it for now. But if I figure out how to get it to play, because I'm having to play this on my not normal computer. That's what we talked about earlier, Chris. but if I get it to play, then I'll definitely I'll get it to play early. But what it does is it shows a migration of people leaving from out of Africa, and the next few slides actually kind of discusses that in detail. But if I get it to play, it'll show that animation of that process. So basically, it shows the outer Africa theory in live or in action, right?
Our hominins have been living on this land for millions of years. But it wasn't noticed until our ancestors tried to escape from Africa. Astonishingly, scientific research has shown that the 7.5 billion people who occupy the Earth today are the descendants of a woman who lived 200,000 years ago in Eastern Africa. Scientists call her mitochondrial Eve. Will you not follow along with me? The traces of how mankind spread by following the footsteps of the descendants of mitochondrial Eve? Mitochondrial Eve was born and lived in East Africa about 200,000 years ago. First, let's go to the place where she was born and raised through Google Earth. You can see a huge lake and a wide meadow. Lake Victoria and Serengeti Plains. You can also see Mount Kilimanjaro. The surface area of Lake Victoria is 59,947 square meters. It is a huge lake that is 38 times larger than London, 99 times larger than Seoul, 76 times larger than Singapore, and 339 times larger than Washington, D.C. The Serengeti ecosystem is a geographical region in Africa, spanning northern Tanzania. The protected area within the region includes approximately 30,000 square kilometers of land, including the Serengeti National Park and several game reserves. The name Serengeti is often said to be derived from the word Seringet in the Maasai language, Ma, meaning endless plains. Mount Kilimanjaro is a dormant volcano in Tanzania. It has 3 volcanic cones, Kibo, Mwanzi, and Shira. It is the highest mountain in Africa and the highest single freestanding mountain in the world, 5,895 meters above sea level. Because of its shrinking glaciers and ice fields, which are projected to disappear between 2025 and 2035, it has been the subject of many scientific studies. So far, we have looked at the region where the common mother of mankind, mitochondrial Eve, may have lived. This is where her descendants lived as hunter-gatherers. It may seem peaceful, but it is also a place of fierce life. At that time, climate change caused the prey to migrate, and it is presumed that they moved along with the prey. Now you are looking at their migration routes from 150,000 to 100,000 years ago. L is mitochondrial Eve, and LX are her descendants. Letters are human mitochondrial DNA haplogroup, arrows are migration paths. The number in the upper left corner of the screen is the estimated age. How would you have known this? We have DNA that is inherited only through females. It's called mitochondrial DNA. We can trace back this mitochondrial DNA to find out who our ancestors were. But why is mitochondrial DNA only inherited through females? Doesn't the man have it? Of course, men also have mitochondrial DNA. However, a man's mitochondrial DNA is not passed on to offspring. Let's find out why. Mitochondrial DNA is only a small portion of the DNA in a eukaryotic cell. Most of the DNA can be found in the cell nucleus and, in plants and algae, also in plastids such as chloroplasts. Sperm from a man's body goes on a long journey, to find an egg deep in the woman's body to obtain descendants. Among tens of thousands of sperm, only one sperm is selected and fertilization takes place. You have experienced your first victory here, so you should be proud of being born. During fertilization, not all parts of the sperm enter the egg. The tail part is left and only the head couple gate is inserted and fertilized. Herein lies the secret that men's mitochondrial DNA is not inherited. Man's mitochondrial DNA resides in the tail. This principle has only recently been used in the study of human history. By 1985, data from the MTNO of 145 women of different populations, and of 2 cell lines, HeLa and GM 3043, derived from an African American and a Kung respectively, were available. The study published on January 1, 1987. The published conclusion was that all current human MTNA originated from a single population from Africa, at the time dated to between 140,000 and 200,000 years ago. After this thesis, DNA was extracted from ancient human fossils and analyzed. The map used in this video was created by referring to the results of direct mapping of these research results and data from Wikipedia. Click the link in the description below to view the MTNA mapping results by year. Now, let's watch the migration path of the mitochondrial Eve descendants again. About 60 to 80,000 years ago, a renewed expansion repopulated Africa with L2 and L3 MTNA types. About 50 to 60,000 years ago, L3 type African moved to Southwest Asia. All non-Africans are today descended from either M or N types, both descended from an Africa L3 type. The group leaving Africa must have been very small, given that only 2 MTNA lineages survived. The M and N types, which left India about 600,000 years ago, arrive in Australia around 50,000 to 40,000. This was the Ice Age, and the seas near Indonesia were all land. It is called Sunda land. It is presumed that they crossed the sea by constructing a raft near present-day Bali. They were the first navigators of mankind. At this time, between New Guinea and Australia was land. Some of the M and N types that migrated to Australia between 50,000 and 40,000 years ago, changed direction and head towards East Asia along the eastern coast. Crossing the M and N type Eurasian grasslands that lived in Western Asia and heading to East Asia. Many races are born in Western Asia. I, U, H, V types go to Europe. At this time, Europe was inhabited by Neanderthals. Type X leaves West Asia a little later and heads for Siberia. It was a very cold ice age. I will introduce the life of our ancestors during the Ice Age through another video. The M and N types, derived from L3, served as the basis of mitochondrial DNA for today's offspring. Currently, Europeans do not have M-type mitochondrial DNA, which is unusual. Between 40,000 and 30,000 years, a group with mitochondrial DNA of type A, B, and F derived from type N appears in East Asia. At the same time, C, G, and D types appear. C and Y types also appear. They have M-type as their ancestor. Type D advances to Japan via the Korean peninsula. The last glacial maximum period begins in 33,000. LGM lasts as long as 25,600. During this time, large continental ice sheets existed in Europe and North America. The sea level was also 120 meters lower than it is today. The west coast of the Korean peninsula and the Bering Sea were connected by land. 25,000 years ago in Asia, A, B, C, and D types spread to the east of Siberia. The X type from Western Europe also arrives here. They lived here in the coldest time. They begin to cross the Bering Sea in search of a warm place where the sun rises. It was the end of the Ice Age. It is estimated that a few types A and D crossed the Bering Sea 20,000 years ago. Around 15,000, a type arrives in Alaska in groups. This is the time when the Earth's temperature rose after the last Ice Age. Sea levels would rise again, but the Bering Sea would have been covered in ice. The period between 14,690 and 12,890 before was the Bowling-Allerud warming period. The Nordic Fennoscandian ice sheet begins to melt. This is the period when I, U, V, J, H, and V types began to migrate to northern Europe. Types A, B, C, D, X, who lived in Alaska, moved to South America. Some of them arrived in South America 12,000 years ago. At that time, there was a huge continental ice sheet on the North American continent. The Laurentide ice sheet to the east and the Cordilleran ice sheet to the west coast of North America covered the continent. But how were they able to move south? Recent research suggests that an ice-free corridor opened between two ice sheets before 12,600. Types A, B, C and D traveled along this route over 1,000 years, reaching Central and South America. The Earth's temperature begins to rise after the end of the Ice Age. Then, between 12,900 and 11,700, the temperature of the Earth's clouds suddenly drops. This period is called the Younger Dryas period. It was found that this was because Lake Agassiz in North America burst and flowed into Hudson Bay, affecting the thermohaline circulation system. During this period, Type B migrates to the Philippines and the island of Borneo. Some of the B types who lived here moved to Madagascar before 1500, and migrated to Polynesia including New Zealand before 1000. So far it has been a long journey of 200,000 years along the mitochondrial Eve. Shall we summarize the results of our trip? The first L type was found in Africa. Type N lived in Western Asia, East Asia, and Australia. M type was widely distributed, and can be found in the Arabian Peninsula, Sahel, India, East Asia, and Australia. Type R was found in Central and Eastern Africa, Western Asia, and India. U type existed in India, Western Asia, and Northern Europe. Type I lived in Western Asia and Northern Europe. T type can be found in Northern Caspian Sea and Western Europe. Type H can be found around the Iberian Peninsula, Northern Europe, and the Black Sea. Type V is found in northwestern Africa, the Iberian Peninsula, and Northern Europe. Type C can be found in East Asia, Siberia, Central America, and the Amazon region. Type A is found in East Asia, North America, and Greenland. Type B can be found in East Asia, Southeast Asia, North America, South America, Madagascar, New Zealand, and the Polynesian Islands. Type F exists in Southeast Asia. Type D is found in Alaska, the eastern United States, and the Amazon region of South America. Types Y, Z and X lived elsewhere, appearing in Siberia and North America. Q and P types appear in Irian Jaya, Indonesia, and Papua New Guinea. If you look at the current distribution location for each type, it appears like a map on the screen. Thanks for watching for a long time. Starting with mitochondrial Eve, by tracking the occurrence and extinction of nomads, we have just started mapping on the
and also mentions a cave that's in Pinnacle Point in South Africa. So in this particular cave, this is where the I guess the baseline of this understanding comes from. So a team of people led by Arizona State University, an individual named Curtis Morgan, found evidence that humans 164,000 years ago were eating shellfish, making complex tools, and reading and using red ochre pigment, all modern human behaviors. The shellfish remains of mussels, periwinkles, barnacles, and other mollusks indicated that humans were exploring the sea as a food source at least 40,000 years earlier than previously thought. So this is 164,000 years ago. This is what's important that we need to know, because we're dealing with a world that's 6,000 years old with this Hebrew paradigm. modern science is saying that we have evidence of advanced humans. The argument is not that if humans actually existed 6,000 years ago. The argument is about the complexity of humans 164,000 years ago. And what this religion is doing, it is dumbing us down so that we can't necessarily agree and understand the narrative of the scientific community. But anyway, so the first archaeological evidence of the human migration out of Africa was found in the caves of Kwezi and Sakur in the present-day Israel. These sites, initially discovered in 1930s, contain the remains of at least 11 modern humans. Most appear to have been ritually buried. Artifacts at the site, however, were simple hand axes and other Neanderthal-style tools. Now, this is actually a crazy thing for most Hebrew Israelites, because we got to understand that at this particular tool, this particular site in Sahul and Quebec, right, we actually have 11 human bodies that are buried in that area. And I would challenge you, Hebrew Israelites, to bring forth a genetic study on those bodies that show that these individuals had the same genetic as you. That these people were E1B1A or E1B1A17 or whatever you are. Like, I would challenge you. But that's a whole nother conversation, like, because you're not ever going to find that. You're not going to find anything even remotely close to that. And the next slides are going to show you why. Next slide. This is a JPOS summary. This is from 2011. This is published from DOI.org. This is a journal publication, The History and African Gene Flow into Southern Europeans, Levantines, and Jews. So the abstract, I know the abstract is not the conclusion. I get that. I completely understand that. But the abstract outlines the paper, and this is what we got to understand what we're going into. So previous genetic studies have suggested that the history of sub-Saharan African gene flow into some West Eurasian populations after the initial dispersion out of Africa that occurred at least 45,000 years ago. However, there has been no accurate categorization of those the proportion of admixture or of its date. We analyzed genome-wide polymorphism data from about 40 West Eurasian groups to show that almost all Southern Europeans have inherited 1% to 3% African ancestry, with the average admixture around 55 generations ago, consistent with the North African gene flow at the end of the Roman Empire and the subsequent Arab migrations. Levantine groups harbor 4% to 15% African ancestry, with the average mixture date of about 32 generations ago. Now that's important, right? Because what we're trying to do, and what you are trying to do as a Hebrew Israelite, you are trying to prove your rightful position in that area, right? And what this is doing is saying that you have no rightful position in that area, because the people who was in that area, the ancestors did back to the Roman period, back to the Levantine area. They don't have any ancestry there, and if they do have ancestry, it's going to go back to the 1% to 3% African ancestry when we're dealing with like the Natufians and things of that sort. These people are not Africans. These people are North Africans. They're not the same sub-Saharan Africans that we are. But that's a whole other conversation. We can get into that when it's time to. I'm just giving you guys a brief overview of the information that I once created and compiled about 4 years ago. And if you would like to challenge the information, there's tons more of that what I have now. But I'm just skimming through a brief presentation just to shut this shit down for once and for all. The next thing that we have is called a topological tree, right? This shows the descendancy of other groups from what we have, right? So as you see at the very, very bottom, you see the sub-Saharan Africans, right? Then from the sub-Saharan Africans, you see these groups of sub-individual groups that kind of sprung from this. And the next slide is going to kind of go into a lot of detail about that. My bad. But it just shows that you have sub-Saharan Africans that are a completely different group because we was south of the Sahara, and then the other groups, these are the E groups that went to the northern area of the Sahara, and they broke up into different subcategories, and they became based on their mixing different sets of Jewish and European populations. The next slide that we have is, are the Jews a mixed race of people? And then we got to understand, because I've heard Brother Unc say this, I've heard Brother Cedric say this, I've heard what's this guy's name? Jabari. I've heard all these individuals, every scholar in our community has always said that Kemet was mixed. It was a diverse group of people. I would also say that the same theory would apply, and that same emphasis would apply when we're dealing with the land of Kemet as well. And so when we're dealing with Kemet, we got to take a full understanding that the people who was in Kemet were right there by the people that's based in Israel, right? So a new scientific paper offers genetic timeline that can support these biblical tales. The paper builds on the two studies published last summer that were the first to use genome-wide analysis to trace the history of the Jewish people through DNA. It demonstrated that there was a biological basis for Jewishness. Said Dr. Harry Oster, director of the Human Genetics Program of the NYU School of Medicine, who led the studies. Among its many findings, Oster's paper indicated that Jews have African ancestry and observed that David Wright, an associate professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School, and his colleagues decided to explore further. Wright's team analyzed more than 500,000 DNA markers across the entire genomes for people from the 7 diverse Jewish populations, including Ashkenazim from the northern Europe, Sephardim from Italy, Turkey, and Greece, and Mizraim from Syria, Iraq, and Iran. They then compared their genetic data with DNA from the 15 sub-Saharan African populations, reporting in the April issue of PLOS Genetics. The researchers found that modern day Jews can attribute about 3 to 5% of their ancestry to sub-Saharan Africans. So let's go back to the Bible now. Since we're dealing with this, information, we're seeing that the Jews are a mixed group of people. They have about, on average, between 1 to 5%. I know they said 3 to 5, but the previous study said 1 to 5% of African ancestry. Let's see, does the Bible or does the biblical narrative show that mixing, right? So in the book of Isaiah, it says, "Whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, Blessed be Israel, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance." Inheritance, this is find inheritance. Inheritance is a my bad. The definition of inheritance: it is a noun. It means the reception. The adjective. It means the receptive or genetic qualities of transmission of parent to offspring, the acquisition the acquisition of a possession, condition, or a trait from past generations. So on 2, you have something that has been inherited. 3A means tradition, and also B at the end. 3B means a valuable possession that is common heritage from nature. So we understand that something that has been handed down, that a valuable reception of genetic qualities by transmission from parent to offspring, that is your inheritance, right? So Israel is the inheritance of a certain group of people. Let's go to that. The group of people that they're dealing with are a mixed multitude, right? The mixed multitude has been quoted in Exodus 12 and 38, a class who accompanies the Israelites as they journey from Ramses to Sukkot, the first stage of the Exodus. These were also probably miscellaneous hanker-ons of the Hebrews, where the Egyptians are lower orders of the remains of the Hyksos, as some think. And the same thing happened when the return of the Jews from Babylon from Nehemiah, which is Nehemiah 13 and 3. Actually 13, the whole verse, but it's 13:3 mentions the mixed multitude. Some notions about Jews were supported by the radical ideas of Houston Stewart Chamberlain. This was a scholar in the 1800s, from 1855 to 1927. According to whom the Jews were a mongrel race that had hybridized with surrounding peoples in very ancient times, but who had also later interbred with Black Africans in Egypt. The first point is thus settled, wrote Chamberlain. The Israelite people is descended from the crossing of different human types. Now these figures give the following results with regard to the Jews in former types in today. In the East and the West, 50% show clear evidence of belonging to the type Homo sphericus, short head, characteristics, so-called Jewish noses, inclination to stoutiness. Only 5% have features and anatomical structure of the genetic Semite of the Bedouin of the desert. In the case of the 10%, we find a color of skin and hair, often 2 of complexion, which point to the Amorite or the Indo-European descent. 35% represent the indefinable mixed forms. The chief result of this anatomical survey is that the Jewish race is in truth a permanent, but at the same time a mongrel race. We got to understand what mongrels are, which retains its mongrel character. All right. Judges 3, 5, and 6. And the Israelites lived among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hebusites, and Jebusites, and they took their daughters for themselves as wives and gave their own daughters and sons and served their gods. 1 Kings 11 and 1. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of a Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonite, and Hittite women. So this is showing that the kings of Israel mixed with the Canaanite women from predominantly, and this is how you get your African gene flow into this Jewish paradigm. When they're dealing with the people from Libya, the people from the Levant area, the people from Nubia, this is where you get your mixing from, where you have the Africans that are being mixed into this paradigm. Ezra 9, 1 and 2. When these things were completed, the officials came to me and said, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the people of the land, but have committed the repulsive acts of the Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, Ammonites, Moabites, Egyptians, and Amorites, for they have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and for their sons. And so the holy race has intermingled with the people of the land. Let's stop for a second, right? Let's stop for a second, right? Let me read this back again so y'all can understand what's going on. This is Ezra, right? Ezra is writing in Ezra chapter 9, verses 1 through 2. He is writing and he is describing the negative things that the people of the Israelite faith are doing. These individuals they're doing repulsive acts of intermingling with Canaanites, which was North Africans, Hittites, which was North Africans, Perizzites, Jebusites, Amorites, Moabites, Egyptians, and Amorites. These are all North African people of very, very dark complexion. And that act in itself was repulsive, and it's in the Bible. For they have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and their sons, so that the holy race has intermingled with the people of the lands. This tells you that the holy race ain't from that land. That's what you first got to understand. That this is that the creation of the Israelite paradigm, the Israelites, the Jews, that whole little narrative, it didn't come from people that was there. This is why you have a separation. This is why you have brothers like Divine Prospect, brothers like brother like me was saying that there is a such thing as a free exilic and a second temple paradigm. The second temple paradigm came under the Persian influence. This is when you have the reform and that's a whole other conversation, man. We're gonna get there eventually. We're gonna get there eventually. We're gonna hold your hand. We're gonna walk you down the street so you can understand what's really going on, because this is something that's huge, and most people don't understand that this right here is something that most people that believe in the Bible can't grasp, right? All right, so now that we can see that the Jews are clearly a mixed race of individuals, because this is the thing we gotta understand, that there is no thing as race. Race is a social construct. Once we understand that race is a social construct, and we're dealing with race based on how that construct has influenced us and affected us, we can have a conversation about it. But we got to understand that there was no such thing as race prior to the invention of race, right? So that being said, let's deal with geography, right? We're gonna have to deal with geography. We're gonna deal with land masses. We're gonna have to deal with what people lived in a certain area. We're gonna have to deal with what people live in a certain land mass. And yes, to the people in the chat, Israelites are Canaanites by default, but they're also people who live in the land of Canaan. Canaanites are simply people who live in the land of Canaan. They're not an ethnic group. These are individuals who still simply live in the land of Canaan. If you look at the Hebrew word Canaan or Canaan, it simply means merchant. These are the people who are the merchants, who are the traders in that area. So we got to understand that in context. This is why I said this is a multifaceted argument. And a lot of times we don't catch on to the argument because we want simple, quick, easy answers. And the answer is a lot of times much deeper than we can comprehend in a paragraph, or more than I can translate to you in a paragraph. So I'm trying to give you some information today that you can use to build upon some information that you may or may not have learned from listening to myself or Chris in the past, or maybe just, there's some new information that you can kind of tag onto, right? But anyway, so let's deal with the geography in the landmass of Israel, right? So one of the older places that we have Neanderthals is, guess where? Ding, ding, ding! Israel, right? Look at the title. Neanderthals in Israel live in open camps, not only caves, 50,000 years ago. Hebrew Israel University team said that prehistoric humans lived near present-day Haifa, used campsite as home base for 10,000 years. Bones and artifacts unearthed in the Ein Kodesh archaeological site, 10 kilometers north of Haifa, indicated that Neanderthals were settled there in that area for about 10,000 years during the Paleolithic area, some 50 to 60,000 years ago. The research team headed by Professor Arella Hover said in the paper, archaeologists have been excavating Neanderthal remains and artifacts across a 1,200 square kilometer area of northern Israel for the past 20 years. The Hebrew University team got a break in 2013 when It was called to a site before a road construction project in northern Israel in the Kishon River, in an area where previous digs had unearthed Neanderthal artifacts. This is one of the artifacts coming up. This is Amud 1. Amud 1 is probably the oldest skulls that we have. Amud 1 is a nearly complete but poorly preserved adult Southwest Asian Neanderthal skeleton, thought to be about 50,000 years old. It was discovered at Amud. Amud is a cave in Israel by Hisaki Suzuki in July 1961, who described it as male, with an estimated height as 1.78 meters, which is 5'10". It is considerably taller than any other known Neanderthal, and the skull has been by far the largest cranial capacity of any archaic humanoid skull ever found, making it, according to Ralph Holloway, one of the most famous specimens of Neanderthal skulls. I have that in this presentation here. This is Amud 1. If you want to research it, you'll find tons of information on Amud 1. Do that on your own time. This is also an NCBI report on Amud 1. I don't want to bore y'all to death. We're going to skip over that. It just talks about the cranial capacity and where they feel like it came from and stuff like that. All right, the next couple of papers that we're going to have, this is by Professor Barton. This is a percentage of haplogroups and sample sizes of the following countries. Population frequency of the main haplogroups J1, J2, R1b, E1b1b, and I obtained from the current study derived from the literature. This just shows the predominant haplogroups in certain areas. And you're not going to see any kind of West and Central African haplogroups that are apparent in these areas. You're going to see mostly West Arabic sources, West Indonesian sources. This is also another, and some people may say this, I ain't gonna lie, some people may say this right here's a pseudo source, but this also shows the percentage of people that are in certain areas. This is going to the Jewish populations of haplogroup J. A lot of folks don't like the haplogroup J, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you can also get this book. It's called The Ancient Black Hebrews, Volume 3. This book is used by Hebrew Israelites, but what it does is it does not prove that Black people, as we know them, are Hebrew Israelites whatsoever. It simply is denoting the fact that people who have melanin are the original Jews. But that's something that we got to dive into, and we got to understand how we define that term Black, because we refuse to define that term. All right, so this is Shem side by side with Ham. So this is the next thing. Let's journey to West Africa. So this is where it gets interesting, right? Because in 70 AD, Hebrew Israelites say that for some reason all the people who lived in the northeast coast of Africa traveled 3,200 miles across the most dangerous desert in the world to somehow settle in this particular region that I have encircled. Not sure how that happened, but let's dive into it, right? So let's talk about sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa is a term used to describe the area of the African continent which lies south of the Saharan Desert geographically. The demarcation line of the southern edge is the Sahara Desert. So once you get below the Sahara Desert, now you have reached sub-Saharan Africa. This is how you understand who are sub-Saharan Africans. Since the end of the last ice age, the North and Sub-Saharan regions of Africa have been separated by the extremely harsh climate and sparsely populated Sahara, which is the Sahara is a desert, forming an effective barrier interrupted only by the Nile River. The regions are distinct culturally as well as geographically. The dark-skinned people of the south of the Sahara develop in relative isolation from the rest of the world. Let me read it again. The regions are distinct culturally as well as geographically. The dark-skinned people south of the Sahara develop in relative isolation from the rest of the world compared to those living north of the Sahara. The people who were north of the Sahara were influenced by Arab culture and Islam. This becomes very, very problematic for y'all, because now we got to deal with certain things in the future, which is one of those things is going to be the Hermetic hypothesis, and that's going to be difficult for y'all to even compete with. Anyway, so we got the Y chromosome lineage of men of West African descent, right? The early African experience in the Americas is marked by the transatlantic slave trade from 1619 to 1850. Those dates necessarily only represent those slaves that went to North America, not South America. I don't necessarily agree with those dates, but for the purpose of this experience, I'll go with it, right? And the rise of the plantation systems. The origins of enslaved Africans were largely dependent on European preferences, as well as the availability of potential laborers within Africa. Rice production was a key industry of many colonial South Carolina low country plantations. Accordingly, rice plantation owners within South Carolina often requested enslaved Africans from the so-called Grain Coast of West Africa, which is Senegal and Sierra Leone, because Senegal, we got to understand, they already produced what? Rice. If you know anything about African food, there's a food out there. If you're in the chat, drop the food in the chat that Senegal is infamous for. I'm gonna give you a hint. It's a red rice. It's kind of reddish color. It's kind of spicy. If you can put that in the chat, I might send you $1, or maybe. Matter of fact, you send me $1, man. Okay. But anyway, there you go, Eric B. Jollof. This is the Jollof rice area. This is why the people who were in that area was brought to the Americas, because they needed them to make the same kind of rice for the American people. But that's a whole other conversation. We'll get there later, right? And this is continued in the argument. In regard to the current sample, this illustrates that a vast majority of African Americans and Caribbean Americans, about 70%, fall into the African Y chromosome haplogroup. We argue that our time estimate of 2,706 years ago for the expansion of the Y haplogroup, the YAP, which they be talking about, reflects the expansion of haplogroup E. And interestingly, this is the concurrent time of which the Bantu linguistic expansion happened, right? So now I'm not even gonna go there right now. We'll answer these questions later. We'll answer all your questions. I'm just gonna skip through this stuff. I'm trying to give y'all as much information as possible, right? So next thing we gotta do, we understood that 2,703 years ago, this is when the start of the Bantu expansion happened. So the next thing we gotta do, we gotta expound on what the fuck is the Bantu expansion. During a wave of expansion that began 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, Bantu-speaking populations, today some 310 million people gradually left their original homelands of West and Central Africa and traveled into the Eastern. Wait a minute, man. Hold on. You telling me that the people from West and Central Africa went to the East and not the East went to the West? Hold on. Let me read this again. During the wave of expansion that began 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, Bantu-speaking populations today, some 310 million people gradually left their original homelands of West and Central Africa and traveled to the eastern and southern regions of the continent. Interesting, because the Hebrew narrative would tell you that the people who are in the West Coast came from the Northeast, but the Bantu expansion, which is a scientific argument with facts involved, would tell you that they came from the West and they migrated east, and then they came back west after they had did trade. this is different. This is a different narrative. Oh my God. This right here is a little bit different. Okay, I'm gonna keep on going. So using data from vast genomic analysis from more than 2,000 samples taken from individuals in 57 populations throughout sub-Saharan Africa, scientists from the Institut Pasteur and the CNRS, together with a broad international consortium, have retraced the migration routes of these populations previously with a source of data. You mean they tell me they retraced this? Oh shit. So you mean to tell me that scientists in an international consortium have retraced the migration, the migratory routes of these populations? Shit. What y'all got, Hebrews? Y'all got any type of science on this shit, or y'all just saying that God said it? Okay, anyway. Their research involves the admission that occurred as a result of successive encounters with local populations that enabled the Bantus to acquire genetic mutations that help them to adapt to their new environments. Finally, by analyzing the genomes of more than 5,000 African Americans, the scientists have identified the genetic origins of African populations deported as slaves by confirming that the bite of Biafra, the bite of Benin, my bad, my mind was already in Biafra, but the bite of Benin in the West Central African were the main ports used for the slave trade to North America. This research was published May the 5th in the Journal of Science. Sheesh. Wow. And y'all can see the map. Y'all can take a look at it for a second. You know what I'm saying? If y'all want to. I mean, y'all may say I'm pseudo. I'm going in my mind. If y'all can't understand my mind, we can ask questions later on so y'all can understand where I'm going. But I feel like I'm going somewhere with what I'm saying. You know, if y'all don't agree with me, then y'all throw tomatoes at me. But if y'all agree with me, throw a one in the chat, throw a thumbs up in the chat, you know. But if I get tomatoes, I get tomatoes, man. But let's go to it, man. So let's deal next with the Bantu language, right? So African sub-Eastern Bantu region has its roots in West Africa, an area that includes Nigeria, Cameroon. In that area, perhaps 3,000 years ago, a group of Niger-Congo speakers, languages, called Bantu. Bantu means the people, had their origins. As a West African population grew, members of the Bantu-speaking population migrated in two directions. On this particular map, you can see those two populations. You see from the Twit of Wed at the top, that's 2,000 years BC. And then from the West Bantu going down into the sub-Saharan Africa areas through the Congo, the Yaka, the Kosan, the Lunde, the Lumba, the Bembe. You see those different migrations that are happening. These things are happening. And now you have the dialects is slightly changing based on people who they have influences with, right? As West Africa's population grew, members of the Bantu-speaking groups migrated in two separate directions. Some went south, along with Africa's west coast. Others headed east across the continent, north of the Congo River and its dense forest for a formidable natural barrier. Then they turned south. This is what the people I was talking about. They went to you see the shit. Let me just point to it right here. They went east, but then this is a lake right here. This is Lake Chad. Lake Chad made them turn south. They turned south. They went right here. They turned south because they had to. And this is what you see, because no one was going north for the most part. Well, let me rephrase it. Not many people went north because this is right here, this whole area right here that you can see my mouse at. This is desert. The desert works as a wall. And so it's kind of like if you're playing a game that plank board with the things of going back and forth. If this is a wall of death right here. So you don't want to go that way. So you're going to expand to where you could. So you're going to expand from here south. You're going to go this way, and then you're going to end up still going south. And the focal point is everything led back to South Africa to Cape Town. Anyway, these migrations spread the Bantu languages and the population genes over a wide swath of the continent. The African southeastern Bantu region is enormous, extending more than 25,000 miles. I mean, Africa is huge, right? So we got to understand some context. So when a person tells you that someone got on and they got upset and decided to walk from Israel to Ghana, that is a long way. That is like walking from New York City to Miami and then to Portland, Oregon, all at the same time. Like that is that far. Is that far. No one's doing that walk, and especially across a desert. That's why it's so ridiculous, because we got to understand context. We got to understand how big Africa is. It's over 3,000 miles for that journey. But that's neither here nor there, right? Y'all gonna believe what y'all want to believe. But who are the Bantu? The Bantu was used by college. It's a Zulu word for people. It is a plural word for Umuntu, meaning a person, and it's based on the stem Nutu, based on the plural prefix Aba. So you got Ubuntu, you know what I'm saying? So Nutu means the person. Then you got pluralize it with the Aba, which you got Bantu. So this is a group of people of the Nutu system, right? The original meaning changed through the history of South Africa. It is a term used in two ways in archaeology, history, and anthropology. It is named, the number one reason it is named a major linguistic group. So you have a group of people who speak Bantu languages, right? And then you also have a group of people who are identified as, the linguistic descendants of the people who speak that language. So it's identified as two separate things. It's kind of like Spanish, right? You have people who are from Spain, but then you also have people who speak Spanish as a lineage, or as a language. So these are two separate meanings. So we got to understand what these things are meaning in context, right? Now, these people who was the Bantu people, they started West African empires. And one of those empires is the Ghanaian Empire, the Ghana Empire, right? The Ghana Empire, or Wagadu, existed before 850, was circa 850 until about 1235. It was located in what is now Mauritania, western Mali. It's a complex society which existed with the region since about 1500 BCE. Now, 1500 BCE, that means that there were no Hebrews there, because the Hebrews were somewhere else, right? So if you was a Hebrew Israelite, you couldn't have had nothing to do with the Wagadu situation because you wasn't there yet. Anyway, complex societies that existed in the region since about 1500 BCE, around Ghana's core region since about 300 CE, when Ghana's ruling dynasty became uncertain. It was the first mentioned in his documentary sources around 830 CE, which is Common Era, which is which is AD, what we would call the introduction of the camel, which preceded Muslims and Islam by several centuries, brought by a gradual change in trade for the first time. The sense of gold, ivory, and salt resources of the region could be sent north and east to the population center of North Africa and Middle East and Europe in exchange for manufacturing goods. The empire grew from the trans-Saharan slave trade in salt and gold. This trade produced an increasing surplus, allowing the larger urban centers. It also encouraged territorial expansion to gain control over lucrative trade routes. The first written mention of the kingdom comes from the Arabic language sources sometime after the conquest of North Africa by the Muslims, when geographers began compiling comprehensive accounts of the world known by Islam around 800. That's 800 AD, so y'all know. The sources for earlier periods are very strange as society, government, and culture, though they do describe location and note its commercial relations. So we have Ghana here that's always been established, right? So you have the Tran-Ethnic Empire. About 1,700 years ago, the Tran-Ethnic Empire, founded between Mauritania and Mali, a sophisticated state, was going to inaugurate a glorious era of Black empires. The controversy about the origin of Ouagadougou, the foundation of this empire was dated to somewhere around 750 BC and 300 AD. The Turkish Al Sudan kind of general tale of the empire of the loop of the Niger River, written about 1,300 years after the fact, from a Black commentator, Al-Muhammad Sa'adi, gives a white origin to Ouagadougou, a theory repeated by the historian Da'afus. The problem with this is the theory that the identity of those white people is not only properly clarified, so it will also stand and could search for a potential itinerary for their arrival in Africa and confirm their presence. So the issue that this problem, that this source, like, so let me back up for a second, right? Let me give you a layman term. I hate reading shit. So in Ouagadougou is under conflict, right? They're trying to say was Ouagadougou established by the indigenous people, or was Ouagadougou established by the Europeans that came that was doing slave trade? So that's the only controversy that you're going to see. It's not going to be about did the Black people do it this period or that period. It was about, was the slave masters, did they get credit for Ouagadougou, or did they get the people who lived there, who built this foundation and established this community? Should they give them the credit for it? And this is a European argument. It's not an argument in African society, because every African society understands that the African peoples of said society established it. They're only trying to give the Europeans credit that came into Africa that enslaved people, because they was a power in that area, if y'all understand what I'm saying. Now, the next thing is Akan people, right? Akan is an ethno-linguistic group of the people of the Guyana coast who speak Akan languages of the Kwa branch of the Naga-Conga family. They include the speakers of the Akin, Anai, Ashanti, Eti, Bula, Borong, Chokoze, Fante, and the Guang languages, and some scholars also consider the Twi a distinct Akan language. I don't know about the Twi, but I'm a roll for this purpose. Most Akan peoples live in Ghana, where they successfully, in a successive waves of migration between the 11th and 18th centuries. Other inhabit the eastern part of the Cote d'Ivoire and Togo. Now you also have the Yoruba people. Shout out to the Yoruba people. Bawo ni kine eruko yen mini eruko eye kayode. Yeah, let's go. All right. So the beginnings of the Yoruba, the origins of the Yoruba date back 2,500 years to the mystifying Nok Empire, to a civilization so mysterious that as yet we do not know what they call themselves, because Nok is not the name of the people. That's what the people have discovered it, decided to call them. So it's not they didn't call themselves the Nok Empire. We call them the Nok Empire. Now, the